This episode of Famidaily is going to be bigger than you might think. There's 3 important things that I have to talk about before I get to the game itself. The easy one is that we have entered the 1990 holiday season. The last 6 weeks of a year account for roughly a quarter of all Famicom games released in a year. Everyone is positioning themselves to be the new hot game when New Year's comes around and people go out to spend their money. And if you're weirdly obsessive, you might have noticed that the November release schedule for games in 1990 has been a bit awkward. Not a lot of releases in the middle of the month, and people seem to be avoiding the weekends, which had become standardized as the release day for video games. The reason for that is on November 21st, Nintendo released the Super Famicom. Now this was far from the first time that there had been a successor system. Sega's on their 4th generation of console hardware by 1990. But Nintendo was the biggest company in Japan, and they were releasing the replacement for their most popular product. It wasn't a sure thing before its release that people would migrate to the Super Famicom. Of course they did, and very rapidly. This is the beginning of the end for the Famicom. By this point next year, it'll be clear that Famicom games are no longer viable. And since there's a new Nintendo platform out there, and I have no intention of doing a Super Famidaily, I've got a bonus video right after this that looks at the first year of Super Famicom releases. There are some that are just Famicom games with slightly better graphics, but there's also an awful lot that are much more advanced than anything the Famicom could do. That finally brings me to our Famicom game, but even before I can start getting into Sanrio Carnival, I've got to talk about the company CharacterSoft, because CharacterSoft is the last great Famicom game publisher. They existed solely to publish games based on the Sanrio characters, but rather than doing something like Pay My Chronics to churn out an easy platformer with Hello Kitty in it, instead they make a lot of the best games of the late Famicom era. Games that get completely ignored because they happen to have a picture of a cat wearing a bow on the front. I'm telling you that at the beginning because Sanrio Carnival is their worst game. And by worst, I mean it's an okay puzzle game in the style of Tetris or Columns. Obviously, this game is based on the Sanrio characters, the best known of them being Hello Kitty. The characters started in the 1970s and were created solely to put their faces on products. Of course, over time it turned into a merchandising juggernaut. The game has 5 of their most popular characters from the time: Hello Kitty, Koropi, Angyodon, Pokopon, and Tabo. They're also going to get their own individual games pretty soon. The game mechanics in Sanrio Carnival are very simple. Pieces drop from the top of the screen in sets of 2. You can use the A and B button to rotate around one of the pieces, and if you hit down, they'll descend quickly. You want to align 3 of the same character. That could be horizontal, vertical, or diagonal. You can also change it so it only uses colored squares when you start the game, but only boring people do that. We're here for the Sanrio characters. We're going to use them. One thing that you might not expect as you play is that the pieces that come down are locked together. In other words, if one side gets stopped, both sides get stopped. And you have to eliminate one of the pieces to unlock them. You can't drop a piece down and then eliminate a square below the one that's in the foundation to make the other one fall. That's all the game mechanics, but there is a little bit more to this one. Sanrio Carnival has 4 different game modes. First, there's a trainer mode. This uses a smaller well and only drops 4 kinds of characters. You play until you top out. If you get really good and can eliminate tiles 200 times, then there is an ending to this mode. When you start it up, it shows you some high-scoring tile combinations, but these are just examples for you to view. The second mode is your standard endless mode. You've got the full-sized well and 5 characters. I encountered a bit of a bug in this one. If you get to level 25 here, the pieces start plummeting instantaneously. And then if you survive to level 26, they go back to normal. I'm sure this caught kids back in the day, but as somebody who's okay at Tetris the Grandmaster, I was still able to play at that speed. The third mode is Challenge Mode. Here you play until you achieve a certain condition. There's 6 stages, and when you complete one, you go on to the next. The clear conditions vary quite a bit as well. On Stage 1, you have to make 30 sets of 3. Stage 2, you're playing for points. On Stage 3, you have to make multiple sets of 3 with placing one piece. In other words, make one set of 3 horizontal and another set of 3 diagonal with one piece. On Stage 4, you just have to get 5 in a row. Stage 5 requires that you make chains, situations where removing one set of 3 causes you to make another set of 3. And finally, Stage 6 requires that you make a lot of triple eliminations. I think I had the most fun with the challenge mode. The standard game is just a little bit too easy for me, and the challenge mode gives it a good twist. The last game mode is a 2-player mode. Here, the players are rushing to eliminate sets, and whoever can eliminate their required number first wins. There are some settings to handicap one player. You could require that they make a higher number of sets, or you could turn off their ability to drop the brick. There's one Easter egg that I know about in Sanrio Carnival. If you pause the game, you can hit A and B to change the background color. There's not really a need to do it, you can just pick what you like. Sanrio Carnival is one of those games that followed in the wake of Tetris that just copied the basics of it. I do like it better than Columns. The fact that you're playing with 6 types of tiles, and the rotation and locking makes it a little bit more challenging for me than Columns. But it's still not that difficult. I appreciate that they put in a lot of modes here, and I think the competitive version is pretty nice. The game isn't well remembered in Japan. In fact, more people seem to remember the background music than playing the game itself. You can pretty easily find box copies for around 100 yen. There is a direct sequel to this game. We're going to see Sanrio Carnival 2 before the Famicom's done. There's also a Game Boy port, though the Game Boy version shrinks that well a lot. And for that reason, I think the Famicom version's a lot better. Like I said before, I think Sanrio Carnival is fine. I have fun with it, but it's not the most engaging of puzzle games. There's another game, for example, that was just released on the Famicom Disk System a few weeks beforehand that plays very similarly, but the gameplay does a lot more with making sets of tiles. And that's the kind of thing that prevents me from going back to Sanrio Carnival very often. Why play it when I have other games that do the same thing, only a bit better?